Of all the evidence for the afterlife, I believe the near death experience is probably the most compelling. And I'm going to give you many reasons for that. And again, there are lots of reasons to believe in the afterlife, and we've talked about some of those. But the near death experience, reports of people who have actually been there and come back, I believe is probably the most compelling evidence. So, what we're going to cover is what happens to those who have an NDE. We'll talk about positive side effects. We'll talk about negative side effects, and we'll talk about the evidence for why NDEs are real. And then we're going to talk about what's probably the most important thing is what are the lessons we can learn from a near death experience without actually having to go through the experience itself and how this can actually change our lives. As I've talked about earlier, fear is a very natural part thing when it comes to death. Biologically, we're programmed as biological beings to avoid death at all costs, literally at all costs. Death of others can put this fear in us. My grandfather died suddenly when I was 8 years old. He went away on a trip and didn't come back. He had a heart attack. Religious indoctrination causes us to fear what waits for us after death if we do believe in an afterlife. And basically, we fear what we don't know. My experience has been the more I know, the less I fear, whatever it is. So when it comes to the near death experience, I want you to understand that this is phenomenon that's been around for as long as mankind has been around. And it's been studied extensively, at least since the late 1970s, when Dr. Raymond Moody wrote the book Life After Life. So that's when it was the studies were kind of formalized. But this goes back in the literature as long as people have been writing, people have been reporting near death experiences. There's a reason for the uptick. It has been studied. Also, because of resuscitation techniques, we can bring a lot of people back from the dead who would have otherwise stayed dead before. Dr. Bruce Grayson has studied extensively, and also Dr. Penny Sartori. And there are many, many others. So, again, when people say, well, these are just anecdotal reports and we really don't know much about them, that is absolutely not true. Now, NDEs are both universal in a sense and unique in a sense. They're universal in that the experiences are very much the same. People report things like going through a tunnel, seeing a light, seeing loved ones, having a life review, feeling a sense of peace and bliss, feeling of universal love. These are very common elements across near-death experiences, but they're also very unique in that some people report seeing people, some people don't see any people. Some people report the tunnel of light, some people don't report the tunnel of light. So my belief is that the near death experience is actually tailored to what the individual needs. The other thing that we want to think about when it comes to near death experience is that every experience on earth isn't the same. So why we would think it would be the same in the afterlife. So I'll talk more about that a little bit later on. Near death experiences produce tremendous effects on people. People positively come out and they typically no longer fear death. They come back with a renewed sense of purpose, a renewed sense of what they're here to do of their life. They come back more loving, more altruistic. They come back less materialistic, not clinging so much to material things. And they typically come back more forgiving. They're more tolerant of other people. Now, what you may not have heard is there are some negative effects from the near death experience as well. The divorce rate for people that have had a near death experience is between 65 and 70%. People have difficulty integrating these experiences, and sometimes their spouses have difficulty adjusting to the new person that came back. People can feel disoriented in this world. They can feel out of place. They can feel out of sorts. They can feel like, I was in this place of great peace and bliss, and now I'm in this painful place, and I really don't understand why I'm back here. They can be rejected by professionals, people in their profession or by medical professionals. It's becoming more accepted now for people to talk about their near-death experiences, but there have been people that have literally been locked up because they reported they had a near-death experience and refused to give up on that idea. Excuse me. People can become overly sensitive to stimulation. They can be very sensitive to food, sensitive to electromagnetic radiation and other things. People can become sensitive to noises. They can go through depression. They can have disrupted careers. Again, that materialistic aspect has fallen away. People might decide to change their careers. So see, that's another effect. Thinking about the near-death experience, for an average adult, it takes between 7 and 10 years to integrate the experience, to actually absorb this experience into their life and what it means. For a child, it's even longer. It can be decades for children to integrate the experience and to come back and to fit into society and to fit into life again. So those are some of the negative experiences you may not have heard about. The other thing about near-death experiences, it's very interesting. Some people have miraculous healings. Anita Morjani, for example, was healed of cancer that was certain to have killed her. Eben Alexander, you've heard of, had was healed of his brain damage from the meningitis that he had, and people have had miraculous healings. But on the other hand, some people carry lingering side effects from the brain damage or other effects that they had during the near-death experience. These are some of the reasons why you don't want to have a near-death experience. So the evidence for the near-death experience changed lives. If a near-death experience were merely a hallucination, a drug-induced trip, or a dream, we wouldn't expect it to change someone's life, either short term or long term. And we've seen people's lives change after having a near death experience. Again, I mentioned earlier, physical healing. The physical healing is undeniable. Uh, Doctors might call it a spontaneous remission or spontaneous recovery. But again, people have been healed of cancer and all sorts of ailments that doctors have no explanations for. I believe that's strong evidence that the NDE is real. People often report psychic abilities. They report being able to tell what's going to happen in the future to a certain extent. They report being able to understand more about other people, seeing auras, seeing what's called the subtle body. People have abilities to connect with people that are no longer with us, people who are deceased, people who are dead. People report those types of abilities. There's all types of abilities that sometimes people come back with. I believe these things, when we add them all together, are very strong evidence that the near death experience is real. They come back launched as like a completely new person, launched to another level of life. Now, another compelling part of evidence for the near death experience is what's called a veridical near death experience. In the terms of near death experience, this is typically reported as an experience that has evidence that someone can prove that they were out of their body. It's interesting though, when you look up the term veridical, it said it's synonymous with truthful or coinciding with reality, which implies that non-vertical NDEs are not truthful or not coinciding with reality. And I don't believe that's true either. But the veridical NDEs are most fascinating to people who are skeptics, who are rationally minded, who are scientifically minded, because there's no other explanation. So if someone has an NDE and they say, I went to heaven, I saw my grandmother, I saw my dog, God told me it was going to be okay, and I came back, we could just dismiss that as that was just a pleasant dream. But if someone has an NDE and they come back, and this is a true case where a guy was out, he had a near-death experience. He was dead on the table. A nurse took his dentures and put them in the drawer. And when he came back around, I guess it was a couple of days later, he said to the nurse, "Where are my dentures that you put in the drawer in the lower drawer of the cart that was by my bed?" Or people who have been in surgeries and had like earplugs in and their eyes covered over and loud noises, banging in their ears. And this is a case also was true when a person died and they were able to report things that the surgeon said in the room while they were under anesthesia. Now, there may be some way you could say, well, maybe under anesthesia they heard and remembered things, but we all know that that's not possible under anesthesia. But what about people who report that I saw the surgeon that was called into my surgery getting on the elevator and I heard what he said to the nurse? Or I saw my sister who was across the country who was got the call that I was not going to make it, and I saw her getting in her car and driving. I could see what she was wearing. All the things I'm giving you are real examples of things that people can report that there's no way that should physically be able to report if they were in their body or if they were dead. So, what are the four major lessons from the NDE? Hopefully, I've convinced you a little bit that the NDE is real. I'll give you a little bit more evidence later on. But the most important thing is, what are the lessons of the NDE? Well, people that have had near death experiences come back and they typically say that we are here for a purpose, that they are here for a purpose. People talk about the ability to forgive fully and the necessity to forgive fully. People talk about having a renewed sense of trust, a trust in life, a trust that everything will be okay. and they talk about unconditional love, love for everyone, everywhere, all the time, no matter what. So let's break this down. A sense of purpose, a plan, again, a renewed zest for life, and a renewed sense of like, I am here for a reason. You are here for a reason. We are all here for a reason. A lot of people that will say everything works together the way it's supposed to be. Um, People often go on a mission after they come back. They feel like I came back here to deliver a message. A lot of times the message is to talk about their NDE. They see the bigger picture in pain and the bigger picture in suffering. So, from our perspective as human beings, of course, we want to avoid pain. We want to avoid suffering. By definition, no one wants to suffer. But when people have NDEs, they often come back and say, I see the reason why things happened in my life. People will have sometimes life reviews and they can see how everything adds up to make us who we are and to help us to grow. I interviewed a woman, her name is Heidi Craig, and she said to me three things. She said, everything is as it should be, everything will be as it should be, and you're unconditionally always loved and never alone. And this is a lesson that people come back with from the NDEs, that no matter what appearances may be, that everything is going to be okay in the end, and that everything has a purpose. They keep life's trouble in perspective. So again, we have trouble in life, but they see that trouble as maybe serving a purpose, and they see that trouble as being part of the plan of why we're here. Now, Friedrich Nietzsche said this quote that says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." And I believe this is absolutely true. If we're going through something and it doesn't seem to serve a purpose, it makes it very, very difficult to go through it. But if it serves a purpose, it at least takes the edge off. So, for example, you go to the doctor's office and to get a vaccine, to get an inoculation. So you know that it's going to hurt. You know it's going to cause you pain. Some people have great fear of needles, but they go anyway because they know that pain, that temporary pain, will provide a purpose that is going to protect them from a vaccine later on. So, this perspective that I'm going to go through pain for a while for greater purpose can be helpful. Forgiveness is another thing they tell us is really important when people come back from near death experiences. Many people report this life review, and much to some people's surprise, they say that they weren't judged, that there was no God or even a committee or whatever that was saying yes or no, heaven or hell, you did good or you didn't do good. If there's any judgment, the judgment seems to come from themselves. They look at their lives and they say, this is maybe what I could have done better. They understand life from other people's perspectives. Um, and if you understand that everything serves a purpose, it's much, much harder to hold a grudge. If you understand things from other people's perspective, people in near death experiences report like they have sometimes they'll like take turns. Like, I felt this experience that I had from my perspective, and then I felt it from the perspective of the other person that was in the room with me. So it might be a person that you did wrong or a person that you did something to that was unpleasant to them, and you feel that, and and you feel what they're feeling, and you know their thoughts and their feelings. And I believe that if we understand people, if we really understand where they're coming from, forgiveness becomes not only easy, I think it becomes kind of automatic. When we truly understand the people's motivations for things, as people have NDEs, get a glimpse into that, forgiveness becomes much more easy for them because we understand that we're all perfectly imperfect. Another lesson from the NDE is to trust completely. Now, why would we trust? Well, again, what Heidi Craig said to me is everything is as it should be. And if everything is as it should be, then I should trust. Everything will be as it should be. So, worrying about the future, if everything is okay now and if everything is okay in every moment, then I no longer have to worry about the future. We are unconditionally and incredibly loved. That this is not a meaningless universe. This is not a universe that doesn't care about us, that there is a source, and that source is love, and that source wants the best for everyone and everything. And the other thing is, whether you actually believe this or not, that everything is as it should be and everything, we're unconditionally loved, everything is temporary. No matter what pain we're going through, no matter what hardship we're going through, it's temporary. We have to endure for a little while. Now, a little while might seem like a long time in the course of a human life. We think of 10 years, 5 years, maybe 5 minutes sometimes can be a very, very long time. But in the course of an eternal being, if you understand that you're an eternal being, this human life, the entire span of it, 70, 80, 100 years, is a very short period of time. And we know from our own experience being in the body, being humans, the time is relative. The older we get, the faster time seems to go. When I was a child and someone told me something was going to happen in 6 months or a year, that seems like an eternity. Now that I'm in my 60s, a year from now seems very short. A year ago seems like it was just yesterday. So time is relative, and understanding that it helps us to trust more that whatever it is we're enduring, we can endure it for a while. John Lennon said, "Everything is okay. Everything will be okay in the end. And if everything is not okay, it's not the end." If we can keep this perspective, if we can keep this perspective that what I'm going through is difficult, but if it's not okay, that it's not the end, then we can press on toward that end. And then the last lesson from the NDE is to love unconditionally. The greatest thing that you'll ever learn is to love and be loved in return. The thing about us, people who have the NDE, and I've talked to many people that have had them, they come back and they say, this idea that we're all one, it's not just a metaphor. It's literally true that we are all part of one great being, that we are all interconnected, that what we do to one, we do to ourselves. What we do to another, we do to ourselves. They understand that we receive unconditional love, which in turn allows them to give unconditional love. And again, as I said earlier, what we do to others, we do to ourselves. So when you look at other people, instead of thinking them as separate and thinking of ourselves in competition with them, if we look at them more like cells in the human body, that we're all part of the same organism, all working toward the same goal, then the cells in our bodies work together. They each perform their function to serve the greater good. If you think about the fingers on your hand, they are apparently separate. You know, your index finger is separate from your pinky and your thumb, but they all work together to perform the same function. They all work together to serve the hand, which works to serve the body. And if this is an image that we can have, it makes it much more easy to love unconditionally. And they tell us that everything is love. And again, this is a thing that we hear and we don't take literally. We say, oh, that means God is love. But what if everything is love, as they report when they come back? That there's this overwhelming sense of love and connection when we drop the physical body. So there are basically three, maybe four ways to know an afterlife exists. And we've gone over some of these in the course. There's direct evidence or experience. There's scientific evidence. There are philosophical arguments, and there's I put in quotes religion, or in parentheses religion, because religion may or may not work for you to know that an afterlife exists. But when it comes to the NDE, a lot of people have dismissed the NDE as evidence because they said, well, it's only subjective. I can't experience what that person's experience. It's just their report. It could be a dream. It could be done by oxygen deprivation. It could be a number of other things that it could be. I don't really know where they were. I can't be where they were. We like to believe that what we know in life is objective, right? We do experiments. We do experiments on things and we report the results. But let's think about this for a second. When a scientist is doing an experiment, let's say he's looking through a microscope. He's looking through the microscope. He is objectively seeing what he's seeing. But what do we have? We have a report of what he saw. We didn't look through the microscope. Now, he will report that out to his peers, and some peers may even replicate it. But again, they are looking through a microscope and they're reporting what they're seeing. And this goes into a journal and it's considered now to be objective because multiple people reported it. But from your perspective and my perspective, we never looked through that microscope. We never saw what they saw. Similarly to the NDE, we've got millions, we've got billions of people who have gone somewhere and reported something, and they come back and they report very similar things to each other. But we say, well, that's just subjective because I wasn't there. Now, do you see the disconnect there? And there's nothing wrong with taking other people's reports for things. We do it all the time. Otherwise, there's not much that we could know. We know much of what we know because other people have experienced it. I've never been to China. I know people who have been to China. I've seen pictures of China, but I've never been to China. But I believe China exists because other people Tell me that it exists. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Similar to with the NDE, if only one or two people reported something fantastical, you might dismiss it. But when it's millions of people, when it's billions of people, then you might want to take it seriously. So, what about the NDE? Most people who have had an NDE are convinced that the afterlife is real. In fact, they report that the afterlife is, quote, realer than real. It's more real than our reality. When you are in bed at night and you have a dream, when you're in that dream, you are convinced that you are in the dream. You are the character in the dream. And you're convinced that the people around you are real. And you're convinced the surroundings around you are real. And as far as you know in that dream, it's very real. It's objectively real. Then you wake up in your bed, and what do you say? It was only a dream. That was just a dream. That just happened in my head. It wasn't real. NDEers report a similar experience a lot of times when they cross over to the other side. They say, this is more like the dream. This is what's reality. This is what's not real. When I got there, I was awake. My senses were heightened. I understood. I remembered why I came here. I saw people there that I've known for eons that I didn't even know here. So this is a report of people that have NDEs. And NDEs are not just a certain subset of the population. They're atheists have them, believers have them, materialists have them, um, men, women, old, young, cross cultures. There is no predictor for who is going to have an NDE and why this is important. Because we can't say that people have certain motivations. If only people had NDEs were, say, Christians, we might say, well, they saw what they wanted to see, or they saw what they believed that they were going to see. But NDEs have been reported by people across cultures, across every type of population you can think of. And again, tens of millions, not billions, billions, I'm going to say, of people have had a near-death experience. It's estimated that 5% of the population has had a near-death experience. In the United States alone, if you take that estimate, which I believe is low, that would be about 17 million people. Now, this is based on self-reporting. Of course, we don't know who's had an NDE, who hasn't reported it. And we know that many people don't talk about their NDEs for years or even decades. How many people never talk about their NDEs? So again, I would say in the United States, it's easily somewhere between 20 and 30 million people, I would estimate, probably have had a near-death experience. And many of them don't talk about it. That's a lot of people that are having this experience. So again, if we had a bunch of scientists reporting this or explorers reporting this, we would say, yeah, there's probably something to that. I look at these people as these are explorers. So these are four, I think, very compelling reasons to believe that the near-death experience is actually true. So what are the after effects of an NDE? And I've already touched on some of these. There's an increased belief in the afterlife. There's a reduced fear of death. There's more value of loving relationships. People become less materialistic. There's an increased belief in God, if you want to use the word God or source or creator or Brahman or 0 point field or universal mind, or whatever you want to call it. They come back often with extrasensory perceptions. And again, they can come back with miraculous healings. So the after effects can be tremendously beneficial. The good news is that Dr. Ken Ring reported that by studying near-death experiences, we can experience some of the same after effects without the bad after effects. He calls studying the NDE the benign virus. I want to talk a little bit about how profound or unprofound NDEs can be. So Dr. Bruce Grayson came up with a scale of NDEs. So he has people as self-reported on a scale of 0 to 2 on 16 different aspects of NDE. Now, the interesting thing is people that have NDEs, as I say, often come back with a reduced fear of death, with being very convinced that the afterlife is real, but not 100%. But when you use this scale to measure how profound their NDE was, some people might say they had an NDE, but they really didn't experience much. Let's say they didn't go deep into the NDE or they weren't there very long. They may not be as convinced. But people that score higher on the Grayson scale of this scale of NDE universally say that they don't believe in an afterlife, that they know. They don't use the word believe. They know that we're all going someplace that is great. They know that we all came from someplace that is great. They know these things. So if you hear someone that's had an NDE that has doubts, I would kind of wonder where they are on the scale, and that's fine. But it'd be like if you walked into a room really quickly and you glanced at something and say, "Yeah, I think that was there," versus you walked into the room and you were able to hold it in your hand and look at it and spend time with it, you'd be more convinced that it was there. So I think that explains why some people have more trust in the afterlife that have NDEs than others. Um, so these are some resources that you can take a look at if you'd like. In terms of afterlife or NDE resources specifically, I recommend Ken Ring's Lessons from the Light. In terms of the lessons from the NDE, 10 Life Changing Lessons from Heaven by Jeff Jansen. After Death Experiences, the rest of the story, PMH Atwater, anything by PMH Atwater is great in terms of this subject. And the book After by Dr. Bruce Grayson, who I mentioned earlier.